Hello, dear children, welcome back. I'm Dr. Jisha Joe. In this session, we shall discuss the second step in the process of respiration, exchange of gases. Exchange of gases take place at two regions in our body. One is across the alveolar surface, and second is in the tissues. Okay, so the gaseous exchange takes place at two regions, one across the alveolar surface and second is in the tissues. Now there are certain characteristic features that make the alveoli best suited for this particular function of gaseous exchange. One of the important feature is that alveoli have very thin walls. And second feature is that the alveoli are richly supplied with blood capillaries. Network of capillaries are present on the alveolar surface. So these are the two important features which make the alveoli best suited for gaseous exchange. That is, the alveoli are thin walled and network of capillaries are present on the surface of alveoli. So I am just drawing an alveolus. That is, suppose that is an alveolus. If we look, we can see that the surface of the alveolus is richly supplied with blood capillaries. So you can see the blood capillaries on the surface of alveoli. As you can see, which I have marked in green color, represents the blood capillaries present on the surface of the alveolus. So I am just enlarging the alveolus. One of the alveolus, I am taking one alveolus and enlarging it. Okay, that is the LS of the alveolus with one capillary. I am drawing. As you can see, that is the single layered wall of the alveolus, which is one cell thick. Okay, and this is made up of squamous epithelium, squamous epithelial cells. And as I told you, surrounding the alveoli, network of capillaries are present. Here I am just drawing one capillary alone. That is the wall of the capillary. As you know, the wall of the capillary is also one cell thick. Okay, that is the capillary wall, which is one cell thick. That space in between the two walls, that is the lumen of the capillary through which the blood flows. Okay, lumen, that is the lumen of the capillary. That is the one cell thick wall of the capillary, which is formed of endothelium. That is the endothelium of the capillary. The blood flows through the lumen of the capillary. So oxygen from outside, the oxygen rich air from outside enters into the alveolus. The carbon dioxide rich air moves out of the alveolus. and this oxygen from the alveolus diffuses into the blood in the capillaries. That is how it occurs. The oxygen present in the inspired air, which is present in the alveolus, diffuse out from the alveolus into the blood inside the capillaries. Whereas the carbon dioxide, the blood collects the carbon dioxide from the different parts of the body and carries it into the capillaries surrounding the alveoli. From the capillaries, the carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveolus and is exhaled out. Okay, so here the diffusion membrane involves 3 layers. So one is the alveolar membrane, as you can see, that is the alveolar membrane. The second is the capillary wall, 1 cell thick capillary wall, and the third region is a basement substance that is present between the alveolar layer and the endothelium of the capillary, which I have marked in blue. That is the basement substance. Okay, so the diffusion membrane is made up of 3 layers. Which are the 3 layers of the diffusion membrane? The 1 cell thick wall of the alveolus, the basement substance that is present in between, and the 1 cell thick wall of the capillary. So oxygen from the alveolus diffuse through the diffusing membrane or diffusion membrane into the blood inside the capillary, whereas the carbon dioxide from the blood diffuses through the diffusion membrane into the alveolus and is exhaled out. So I hope you have understood the diffusion membrane. Now we shall have a look at the diagrammatic representation of blood circulation in our body. Okay, so I'm just drawing the heart there. That is the heart. Okay, the heart has 4 chambers. Okay, the 4 chambers of the heart. That is the right auricle, right ventricle, left auricle, left ventricle. Okay, the oxygenated blood is pumped from the left ventricle to the different parts of the body. Okay, from the left ventricle, the oxygenated blood is pumped to the different parts of the body. Here I am drawing the cells. That is a tissue with the different cells present there. Okay, different cells are present there. So the oxygenated blood carries the oxygen. So from the left ventricle, the oxygenated blood passes through the aorta to the different parts of the body, and from the different parts of the body, so the carbon dioxide will be collected and brought back to the heart. Okay, I am drawing it in blue because that is the deoxygenated blood, or the blood containing more carbon dioxide. Okay, and it is poured into the right auricle. From the right auricle, it passes into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, the deoxygenated blood is carried to the lungs for oxygenation. So here I am just drawing one alveolus. Okay, that is one alveolus I am drawing there. That is the alveolus. So that is the pulmonary artery carrying the deoxygenated blood. Pulmonary artery carrying the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle into the lungs. Here I have just drawn one alveolus alone so that you can understand better. Okay. Then in the lungs, the blood gets oxygenated and is transported back into the left auricle. Okay, it is poured into the left auricle. So the red colored part shows oxygenated blood and the blue colored region is shown by it represents the deoxygenated blood. Okay, so here okay, hope you remember this, which we have studied in 10th standard. So this is the general circulation of blood that is taking place in our body. The oxygenated blood from the left ventricle passes through the aorta, that is the aorta, the largest vessel, that is the aorta. We know the aorta breaks up into the arteries. Smaller branches are called the arteries. Arteries break up into finer branches which are called as the arterioles. The finer branches of the arterioles are the capillaries, and the exchange of gases in the tissue takes place or occurs between the blood in the capillary and the cells of the tissue, because as we know, the capillaries are one cell or the walls of the capillaries are only one cell thick. So it acts as a diffusion membrane. Whereas when we come across the walls of the arteries or the veins, we can understand that they are thick walled muscular walls. Diffusion cannot occur through their walls. So here also exchange of gases in the tissue also takes place at the level of capillaries. That is, the blood from the capillaries, the carbon dioxide in the cells of the tissues diffuse into the blood in the capillaries, and the oxygen from the blood in the capillaries diffuse into the cells of the tissue. Okay, so so that is the oxygen rich blood. The oxygen present in this blood diffuse into the cells of the tissue, and as I told you, respiration takes place in the cells of the tissue. Carbon dioxide is produced, carbon dioxide will be produced inside the cells. Okay, carbon dioxide will be produced. This carbon dioxide will diffuse into the blood in the capillaries. So that is why this region is shown in blue color, because this region contains more carbon dioxide. That is the deoxygenated blood. And finally the capillaries rejoin to form the venules, the smallest vein. Then the different venules rejoin to form the veins, and the different veins rejoin to form the largest vein, which is the vena cava, and it is the vena cava that drains blood into the right auricle. Okay, and from the right auricle, the deoxygenated blood passes into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, through the pulmonary artery, it is taken into the lungs. Here the lungs is represented just by one alveolus alone, and that is shown in blue color because that region contains more carbon dioxide. Then in the lungs, oxygenation takes place, as we know, as we have seen here. Exchange of gases take place at the alveolar level also, or across the alveolar membrane. That is, here we know there is more carbon dioxide, So what will happen? This carbon dioxide will diffuse into the alveolus, whereas the alveolus contain oxygen rich air which has been inspired, isn't it? Oxygen rich air is taken in. So alveolus, inside the alveolus, oxygen rich air is present. From that, oxygen diffuses into the capillaries and it is taken into, or it is transported, or it is poured into the left auricle, from where it is poured into the left ventricle, from where it is transported through the aorta to the different parts of the body. So this is the circulation, a diagrammatic representation of the circulatory system in our body. We have also seen that that is a larger system which is called as the systemic circulation. Larger circulation that you see here, which is the systemic circulation, and that is the smaller circulation which is called as the pulmonary circulation. Okay, and so we can denote this artery as the systemic artery, and this as the systemic vein. Systemic vein. Okay, I hope this much is clear. So now we shall move on to how this exchange of gases is taking place at the alveolar surface as well as in the tissues. So first let us have a look at the exchange of gases across the alveolar surface. So as we know, this exchange of gases is simply based on the simple process of diffusion. What is diffusion? Movement of molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. So diffusion depends upon the concentration gradient or the pressure gradient of the gases present. Okay, so diffusion is based upon the partial pressure of the gases. We can say that the diffusion depends upon the partial pressure of the gases. So exchange of gases both at the alveolar surface as well as in the tissues occur by the process of diffusion, and this process of diffusion depends upon the partial pressure of the gases. Now what is meant by partial pressure? Okay, partial pressure is the pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases. We know air is a mixture of gases. Okay, suppose the partial pressure of oxygen means the pressure contributed by oxygen in the mixture of gases is called as partial pressure of oxygen. So here in the process of diffusion both at the alveolar surface as well as in the tissues depends upon the partial pressure of the gases. Okay, so I hope you have understood what is meant by partial pressure. So what is partial pressure? The pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called as partial pressure, and it is denoted by PO2. Partial pressure of oxygen is denoted by PO2, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide is denoted by PCO2. Okay, that is how we denote the partial pressures of the two gases. Now coming back, the inspired air. The inspired air means the air that we take in. From where do we take in the air? This air is taken from the atmosphere, isn't it? It is the atmospheric air that is being inspired. So in the atmospheric air or in the inspired air, the partial pressure of oxygen is 159 millimeters mercury. Partial pressure of oxygen is 159 millimeter mercury. Whereas the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 0.3 millimeter mercury. That is in the case of inspired air. Okay, listen carefully. So children, once again, the inspired air is the air that we take in. From where do we take in this air? It is from the atmosphere. So the partial pressure of oxygen in the atmospheric air or in the inspired air is 159 millimeters mercury, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the atmospheric air or in the inspired air is 0.3 millimeters mercury. So this air now reaches the alveolus, isn't it? The inspired air passes through the respiratory tract and finally reaches the alveolus. Now what happens in the alveolus? Already some amount of carbon dioxide is present, which has been diffused from the blood into the alveolus. Okay, the carbon dioxide that has diffused from the blood into the alveolus is present in the alveolus. So this inspired air mixes with this exhaled air that is present in the alveolus, and the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolar air, okay, that is the alveolar air. So alveolar air is a mixture of the inspired air and the carbon dioxide rich air, okay, the exhaled air. The carbon dioxide which has been carried from the different parts of the body have now diffused into the alveolar sac. So the alveolar air is actually a mixture of the inspired air and the carbon dioxide rich air. So the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolar air is 104 millimeters mercury, and that of carbon dioxide is 40 millimeters mercury. The partial pressure of carbon dioxide has increased because the carbon dioxide from the blood has diffused into the alveolus. But even then, still we can understand that the partial pressure of oxygen is greater there in the alveolar air. Hope it is clear to you. Okay, so the alveolar air is a mixture of the inspired air and the carbon dioxide rich air. From where did this carbon dioxide come? The carbon dioxide which is carried from the different parts of the body through the capillaries have now diffused through the diffusion membrane into the alveolus. So once the inspired air enters into the alveolus, this inspired air mixes with this carbon dioxide rich air, and the air inside the alveolus is called as the alveolar air. The partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolar air is 104 millimeters mercury, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide has increased from 0.3 in the inspired air to 40 millimeters mercury. But still, even though the partial pressure of carbon dioxide has increased in the alveolar air, still the partial pressure of oxygen is greater there, isn't it? That is, more amount of oxygen is present in the alveolus. So naturally what will happen? Oxygen will diffuse from the alveolus into the blood inside the capillaries. Okay, so the diffusion process that is taking place there depends upon the pressure gradient. Okay, so here the partial pressure of oxygen is greater there inside the alveolus, so oxygen diffuses from the alveolus into the blood inside the capillaries. Now, as I told you, this is oxygen rich blood is taken to the left auricle. From the left auricle it passes into the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle through the aorta it enters the systemic artery, the artery system, the systemic artery, the largest circulation in our body, which is a systemic circulation, that is the artery of the systemic circulation, which is denoted by the systemic, the term systemic artery there. Okay, now if you look at the partial pressure of oxygen in the systemic artery, we can see that the partial pressure of oxygen, P carbon dioxide, is 40 millimeter mercury, and partial pressure of oxygen is 95 millimeters mercury. Okay, in the systemic artery, the partial pressure of oxygen is still greater there in the systemic artery. So, it is the artery that brings the oxygen rich blood, and at the capillary level, as I told you in the beginning, the arteries divide to form arterioles. Arterioles divide to form finer branches which are called as the capillaries, and in the capillaries again the partial pressure of oxygen will be greater. So, oxygen diffuses from the blood in the capillaries into the cells of the tissue. Whereas in the tissue, in the cells, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide will be more. So, the carbon dioxide from the cells diffuse through the diffusion membrane into the blood in the capillaries. Okay, this deoxygenated blood is brought back into the heart through the systemic vein. If you look at the partial pressures of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the systemic vein, the partial pressure of oxygen is 40 millimeters mercury, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 45 millimeters mercury, that is in systemic vein. So, you can see in the systemic vein the partial pressure of oxygen is less when compared to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So, that is why carbon dioxide from the capillaries is diffusing into the alveolar air or into the alveolus. Okay, so as I told you, the exchange of gases at the alveolar surface or across the alveolar surface as well as in the tissues follow the simple process of diffusion. Diffusion is simply the movement of molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. So, here the diffusion depends upon the partial pressures of the two gases. What is partial pressure? Partial pressure is the pressure contributed by a gas in a mixture of gases. Is called as partial pressure. So, movement of a gas, suppose oxygen moves from a region of higher partial pressure to a region of lower partial pressure. Okay, so that is how exchange of gases, both oxygen and carbon dioxide, take place across the alveolar surface as well as in the tissues. So, children, I hope you have understood how the exchange of gases take place across the alveolar surface as well as in the tissues. In the next session, we shall see how this oxygen and carbon dioxide is transported through the blood. Hope this session is clear to you. If you have any doubts, please ask your doubts, give your suggestions in the comment section. If you like my classes, please do subscribe and share my videos with your friends so that they can also benefit from them. Thank you.